Hello friends, I will start this video with a short request. As the Another Life History channel, I really put a lot of effort into making these videos. I would be very happy if you subscribe and like the video. It's a small step for you, but a very important one for the Another Life History channel to grow on YouTube. Thank you in advance. Let's start. Tonight, you are stepping into a winter night 1,000 years ago, where the wind whistles and beats against the ramparts among heavy grey stones. While the snowstorm outside wraps around the castle like an invisible hand, the silence inside is broken only by the sound of the fire and your breathing. Despite the weight of the furs on you, you feel that ancient cold that has permeated the corners of the room on your skin. This is that dim bedroom where even kings tremble in the face of nature's ruthlessness, even though it is the pinnacle of power. In this space surrounded only by stone, fire and wool, far from the comfort of the modern world, you will witness the most challenging yet mystical state of sleep. As your eyelids grow heavy, the icy breath of history will slowly pull you in. If you are ready, our journey begins in the flickering light of the torches. Now I want you to put all the chaotic noise and endless rush of the day into a locked chest in the farthest corner of your mind and close it. Drop your shoulders, take a deep breath, and focus only on my voice. Because right now, nothing is more valuable than this moment and your peace. Everything in the outside world can wait. Just allow yourself to rest now and get lost in the heavy tempo of the past. If you subscribe to the channel and like the video, you can now put on your crown and declare yourself a king or queen in the Middle Ages. When you close your eyes and lie in pitch darkness, you feel with your whole being that massive power defining the boundaries of the void surrounding you, namely the stone walls of the castle. These walls are not like the thin bricks of modern buildings or elegant borders woven with insulation materials. They are massive blocks of hewn limestone or granite, meters thick, each weighing as much as a human. Even if the pale winter sun hits the outer surface of these stones during the day, that stubborn density in the nature of the stone never allows the heat to enter. This phenomenon, called thermal inertia in physics, is the greatest, quietest, and most invincible enemy of the night for a king living in a medieval castle. The walls act almost like a living organism. They trap the cold of days-long snowstorms, frozen rivers, and freezing winds in their depths and vomit this into the bedroom slowly, steadily, and unstoppably when night falls. Even if you are in your warm bed under wolves, you understand from that sharp air filling your lungs with every breath that the room's air is constantly being cooled by these stone masses. This situation is quite different from the experience of ordinary peasants living in wooden huts or adobe houses of the period. Wood is inherently a warmer material and can warm up quickly even with a small fire lit inside. However, stone castles are like infinite wells that swallow heat. No matter how much you stoke the fire in the fireplace, the moment the heat energy spreads into the room's air, it is pulled and absorbed like a magnet by the cold stone walls. It is as if the walls are hungry for any crumb of warmth regarding life in the room. That is why when you stand in the middle of the room, you experience two different climates at the same time. The heat of the fire hitting your face and the cold of the walls hitting your back. You don't need to touch the walls. That invisible cold wave radiating from them draws your body heat to itself with a cooling effect. The shiver you feel when approaching a block of ice is an atmosphere covering the whole room here. Stone feeds its own coldness by stealing your warmth. As the outside air temperature drops even further later in the night, the thermal behavior of the walls becomes even more brutal. While the stones release the cold they stored during the day into the room, they also cause the humidity in the room to condense on the wall surfaces. In the flickering light of the torch, when you look at the walls, you can see the surface of the stones sweating and thin water droplets trickling down from that grey surface. This is the liquefied form of the castle's cold breath, known as the weeping of the stone. Unlike the dry and constant heat in modern homes, this damp cold penetrates to your bones, and no matter how much you hide under quilts, you feel that damp weight on you. Although the mortar between the walls was placed there centuries ago, it seems to still harbour the wet sand of that riverbed and the cold within. Because of this thermal inertia, the season inside the castle always lags behind the season outside. Even if the sun shines outside for a day and the weather warms up, the stones of the castle have such a large mass that it takes weeks for them to warm up. Therefore, even if the harshest days of winter have passed, you continue to experience the freezing cold of weeks ago in your bedroom. The walls are like cellars that freeze and store time and cold. What you feel while trying to fall asleep is not just the coldness of the air, but the presence of this massive and crushing matter surrounding you on all four sides. Sleeping among these stones is like sleeping in a cave in the heart of a mountain where the sun never reaches. You are safe. Enemies cannot reach you, but the cold is the most loyal and dangerous guest within the ramparts. When you bury your head in the pillow and dive into the dimness of the room, your eyes inevitably catch those huge, heavy and dusty fabrics covering the walls from top to bottom, the tapestries. Although at first glance they look like just works of art, colourful covers depicting dull-eyed hunters or mythological monsters, they are actually vital engineering marvels designed so you don't freeze. However, the real secret is hidden not in the fabrics themselves, but in the way they hang. That is, in that dark, invisible gap left between that icy stone wall and the wool weave. Servants never stick them to the wall while hanging these covers. They knowingly and willingly leave a distance of a few fingers, sometimes a span. This dead air space is the most critical line of defense that maintains the heat balance inside the room and separates you from the white apocalypse outside. While lying motionless in your bed, you can visualize how this gap works. Stone walls try to spread the cold inside like an ice mold, under the influence of the winter outside. If these tapestries were stuck to the wall, they would instantly absorb that cold through conduction and reflect it into the room. However, that stagnant air layer in between acts as an invisible cushion, slowing down the movement of heat and cold. When air remains motionless, it is one of the best insulators in the world. The weak heat radiating from the fireplace inside the room hits the woolly surface of the tapestry and stays there. Since it does not contact the cold stone wall behind, it does not lose its heat. This is a primitive but clever application of the logic of double-glazed windows in the modern world centuries ago. While peasants try to plug the cracks in their huts with mud and sleep with the roar of the wind, you are under the silent protection of this air cushion. From time to time, wind leaking through microscopic gaps between the castle stones with the intensity of the storm outside fills this air gap. In those moments, you see those hundreds of kilos of heavy tapestries hanging on the wall, gently lift in a ghostly way, as if someone is behind them, and settle back down. This fluctuation is like the breathing of the room. That dark void behind the fabric actually has an uncanny microclimate, completely different from the rest of the room. That is an intermediate zone where the wall sweats, humidity condenses, and the smell of mold and cold are trapped, never seeing the face of the sun, while the front face of the tapestry offers you a dry and warm texture. The back face becomes heavy with moisture, facing that wet and cold stone. The distance between these two worlds is only a few centimeters, but the difference it makes feels as sharp as summer and winter. The thick wool texture of the tapestries also absorbs sound, giving the room that characteristic muffled silence. Against the hardness of the stone echoing the sound-absorbing softness of the wool and the air gap behind creates the isolated environment needed to fall asleep. Even the slightest rustle you make while turning in your bed is absorbed by these fabrics. However, that thought is always in a corner of your mind. Right behind that colourful and warm-looking curtain waits a wall, dark, wet, and cold enough to freeze your hand if you touch it. That air gap is the neutral zone between your comfort zone and the savagery of nature. That slight coolness you feel when you bring your hand close to the tapestry is proof of the existence of the cold storage behind. But the wool warmth you feel when you touch the fabric reminds you how this simple air gap protects you. Behind these layers, in the safety of the shield created by invisible air, you transition into the silent world of dreams. When your eyes get used to the darkness and you look down from the edge of your bed to the floor of the room, you know that what awaits you there is not a bare and ruthless stone surface. If it were, every time you stepped on those grey slabs, all the heat in your body would be pulled from your soles in seconds, replaced by an ice cut aching your bones. However, as a king, you are protected by one of the simplest but most effective weapons nature offers against winter. The floor is covered with a thick vegetation cover, a soft carpet consisting of dried reeds, straws, and fragrant herbs. This is not just an aesthetic choice. It is an organic barrier laid to cut that insidious cold filtering up from the cellars, dungeons, and deep within the earth beneath the castle. The place you step on is no longer stone, but a dry meadow created by human hands. These long reeds and grasses collected from riverbanks in summer were dried for days under the sun, and the water inside them was completely evaporated. Now, in this darkest hour of winter, when laid in layers on the floor of the room, microscopic air pockets trapped inside each stalk provide perfect thermal insulation. This layer, which slightly crushes, rustles and changes shape under your feet as you walk in the room, is the only thing standing between you and that constant and deadly coldness of the stone. That dry rustling sound made with every step you take is the only thing breaking the silence of the room, and this sound whispers to you that you are safe, that your contact with the cold stone is cut. While peasants living in poor huts of the period try to sleep on compacted earth floors, often on a damp and muddy surface, this thick plant layer in your room is a combination of luxury and survival skills. In winter months, this layer is made so thick that you feel like you are sinking up to your ankles while walking. It is as if you are walking in snow, but this snow is warm, dry, and fragrant. Special herbs are mixed into this vegetable cover not only for insulation, but also to calm your soul. Dried leaves of lavender, thyme, mint, chamomile, and sometimes expensive eastern spices are sprinkled among the reeds. As you take steps, these crushed plants release those essential oils hidden inside them, bringing the sweet and refreshing scent of a past spring to the room that the winter outside can never have. This scent suppresses the smell of dampness and mould emitted by the stone walls, calming your mind and preparing you for sleep. While everything outside is frozen and odourless, this floor inside is like a living, breathing and reactive organism. However, a practical purpose always lies beneath this romantic image. Dry herbs absorb moisture in the room. They prevent the air from becoming too dry or soggy. Thus, it increases your sleep quality. The squeaky softness you feel when you hang from your bed and plunge your feet into this pile of grass can remind you of the safe warmth of a barn. This is a primitive feeling. It is a feeling of relief left from times when humans were intertwined with nature. Although the stone floor tries to carry cold air currents coming from the gaps underneath upwards, this labyrinth of complex plant fibres slows down and disperses the rising of that cold air. The stagnant air formed among the herbs creates a buffer zone just like the gap behind the tapestries on the walls. While floating on this dry sea of grass, you're actually standing on civilization's oldest and most natural answer to the cold. Even if the fire in the fireplace diminishes throughout the night, this thick quilt on the floor prevents the room's base temperature from dropping suddenly, continuing to maintain the thermal balance necessary for that long and deep sleep that will last until morning. When you put your head on the pillow and look up towards the ceiling of the bed, what you see is not the dark and distant stone arches of the room. It is a carved wooden sky or an embroidered heavy fabric hanging right above you. This massive structure, set up in the very centre of the room, with thick columns rising from its four corners and curtains pouring down like waterfalls from these columns, is actually not a piece of furniture designed for sleeping, but a second and smaller building built inside the room. This box, the smartest defence mechanism developed by medieval architecture against the cold, tears you away from the freezing volume of that huge bedroom which is impossible to heat. When the curtains are open, you are still a part of that large and uncanny hall. However, when the servants pull those heavy velvet or brocade fabrics around you and close them tightly, all your visual and physical connection with the world is cut off. Now you are not in that cold kingdom ruled by stone walls, but inside a sheltered, dim and warm micro-universe whose rules are determined only by your breath and body heat. This architectural choice is based entirely on volume economy. The ceiling of the room can be meters high, and the hot air rising from the fireplace goes up to those heights and disappears before you even feel it. However, that low ceiling over the bed, the canopy, prevents the heat radiating from your body from escaping upwards. It catches it and reflects it back to you. While the peasants of the period watch helplessly as the heat leaks away through straw roofs in their one-room huts, you are safe in a cyclical current created by your own heat under this wooden cover. The air volume inside the bed is so reduced that even a single exhale of yours contributes to heating this narrow space. Fabric walls and the wooden ceiling resist the devouring effect of that great void outside like a cocoon wrapping you. The fabric of the curtains is much more than an ordinary cover. These are usually made of tightly woven wool, velvet or silk, and sometimes supported by double-layered linings. These layers do not allow cold air currents outside and those insidious winds leaking under the door to enter inside the bed. When you lie inside the bed, you can hear the roar of the storm outside. However, the icy touch of the wind hits these fabric walls and turns back. This feeling of enclosure reminds one of that primal sense of security in the mother's womb. Outside, beyond the curtains, there is an uncanny world where shadows dance, candles flicker, and cold prowls. But inside, within this fabric cage, time has stopped. Air has become heavy and temperature has stabilized. This room within a room also provides acoustic insulation. Thick fabrics absorb sounds echoing on stone walls, muffling the crackles and footsteps outside, offering you that deep silence of sleep. That oppressive and dense air you feel when you get into bed is actually the smell of survival. The scent of lavender pouches, your own skin, and heated wools concentrates in this narrow volume, wrapping you with an intoxicating weight. While in the modern world a bed is just a surface to lie on, here the bed is a shelter to enter. Close the doors and completely isolate from the outside world. At the centre of this textile architecture, despite all the rage of the winter outside, you fall into the safest sleep of the night inside this small, warm and dim void you created. When you approach your bed with heavy steps, the first detail that catches your eye is that it does not stand on the ground like ordinary furniture, but is set up at an imposing height that requires effort to reach. This bed is so high above the floor that to get into it one must climb a carved wooden step or a small velvet-covered ladder. This height is not just a show of reign or noble arrogance. It is the most strategic physical measure taken against an invisible war inside this room. Because cold air is dense and heavy by nature, it behaves just like invisible fluid mercury and always settles at the lowest point, that is, the stone floor of the room. Even while standing in the room, you can feel that the air wrapping your ankles is much more freezing than the air licking your face. This high bed is a lifeboat designed to physically keep you above that cold air lake that accumulates on the floor and rises insidiously throughout the night. This situation forms a sharp contrast with the reality lived by ordinary people of the period. In huts in villages, people usually sleep on low divans or straw mattresses laid directly on the ground, and therefore they become the direct target of those sharp, cold air currents, namely drafts leaking under doors throughout the night. However, when you climb onto this high platform, while the wind leaking from door gaps in the lower parts of the room crawls on the floor, almost like invisible snakes, you remain suspended at a safe altitude, the more stagnant and relatively warmer air layer above. The moment you climb into bed, you take a vertical journey not only towards sleep, but also towards a milder climate. Each step takes you a few degrees further away from the freezing point. That dark and deep space under the bed is usually left empty or rarely used chests are placed inside. But the main function of this gap is to create a huge air cushion between your body and that ice-cold floor. For the cold to reach you, it first has to overcome this gap, climb the wooden frame of the bed, and pass through the thick mattresses, which is made almost impossible with the help of the weak heat of the fireplace. The hot air rising from the fireplace or torches moves towards the ceiling and accumulates there due to the laws of physics. The bed being so high allows you to be closer to these rising crumbs of heat and to benefit from that precious pocket of hot air accumulated on the ceiling. If you were sleeping on the floor, You would be vulnerable in that dead zone where heat never visits and only cold reigns. In the deepest hours of the night, when the wind howling in the corridors of the castle, with the pressure of the storm outside leaks under the bedroom door. This current heads directly to that dark void under the bed. While lying in your bed, you don't even feel this current passing through the gap below you, because the thick wooden base and multi-layered wool mattresses isolate you against this attack from below. When you hang your hand down from the edge of the bed, that sudden temperature change you feel at your fingertips reminds you of how correct your position is. Below is the wild world of cold and draught. Above is a noble shelter where stillness and shelteredness reign. Thanks to this height, even when the fireplace goes out towards the morning and the room temperature drops rapidly, the sun will have already risen before that freezing layer on the floor reaches you. You find peace in the most untouchable state of sleep by looking down on the cold that succumbs to gravity from the top of this wooden tower. The moment you climb to the cold-protected peak of the high bed and drop yourself onto the mattress, you feel that your back meets not a hard surface, but a cloud-like depth that pulls you in, gently accepts your weight, and takes the shape of your body. This is not an ordinary bed. It is a huge fabric bag filled with the softest breast feathers, that is, down feathers, of thousands of geese. This is the highest comfort and engineering marvel a human could possess in the world of that era. Unlike the peasants sleeping in straw-filled beds and feeling the hard ground on their backs as the straw gets crushed later in the night, you are like floating in a gravity-free void inside this pile of feathers. The moment your body touches the mattress, the feathers flee left and right, creating a special hollow for you, a temporary mold compatible with your body. You don't actually sleep on the bed. You sleep inside the bed. The feathers rise and wrap you from the sides, almost swallowing you halfway. The real miracle of this luxury-filling material is not in its softness, but in its thermal capacity. Each bird feather is a complex network consisting of millions of microscopic fibers evolved to trap air by nature. When you lie on this pile, the heat produced by your body is trapped in the air pockets between these feathers instead of mixing into the cold air of the room and disappearing. The bed doesn't absorb your heat. On the contrary, it reflects it back to you like a mirror. Within minutes, the surface of the mattress in contact with you reaches your body temperature and keeps it constant until morning. Defying the greed of stone walls absorbing the cold, the goose-down bed acts like a generous heat source. Actually, it is not the bed that warms up. The bed is just a loyal guard that does not allow your life energy to escape. When you move, that light, dry, and soft rustling coming from inside the bed is the sound of thousands of feathers rubbing against each other. This sound is not a noise tearing the silence in the room. On the contrary, it is a whisper calming you down and reminding you of naturalness. Unlike that rough and dusty crackle made by straw beds, goose-down changes play silently like fluid sand. When you pull the quilt over you, you feel like a warm sandwich with this soft heat support coming from below. Your back, legs and shoulders never contact the cold coming from below. Even if the room temperature outside drops below zero and your breath freezes in the air turning into white steam clouds, that deep hollow of the bed in contact with you is as warm as a tropical climate. Even the preparation of these beds is a ritual in itself. Servants fluff the feathers by hitting the bed with long sticks every morning, ensuring fresh air gets inside. In this way, when night comes, the feathers are not deflated and hardened. They become fluffy and vigorous, ready to trap air again. When you get inside, that fluffiness slowly deflating and wrapping you takes away the tiredness of the day with it. Goose down is an organic material and it seems to still preserve its vitality. It reacts to your heat, balances your moisture, and offers that breathable warmth that synthetic materials can never give. In the darkest and coldest hour of the night, while the stones of the castle freeze, you sleep soundly, completely independent of the outside world, inside that invisible shield created by your own body heat in the middle of this sea of feathers. When you prepare to bury yourself in that inviting and soft depth of the goose-down bed, the first feeling awaiting your skin is a surprising and sharp moment of awakening. After taking off the heavy furs and wool robe on you and gliding between those layers with only a thin shirt, you encounter a surface threatening all the warmth your body has preserved until then. This is the finely woven, snow-white and perfectly smooth linen sheet. Linen is inherently a cool fabric. The structure of its plant fibers does not hold heat on it. On the contrary, it rapidly spreads and disperses the heat of any hot object touching it to its surface. That's why the first second you lift the quilt and extend your legs into that whiteness, a shiver climbs rapidly along your spine as if you are lying on a sheet of dry ice or a polished cold marble. This contact is a physical shock wave that momentarily clears your mind in the dimness of the room and on the verge of sleep. This momentary discomfort is actually the price of the status and cleanliness you possess. Ordinary people of the period curl up and sleep on straw piles with their coarse wool clothes they work in the fields. Wool itches, makes you sweat and holds dirt, but it feels warm. However, as a king, you demand everything touching your skin to be pure, spotless, and smooth. Linen is the symbol of cleanliness. However, this cleanliness requires paying a cold price on winter nights. Your sheets have been washed by beating at the riverbanks by the castle's laundresses, whitened in the pale light of the winter sun, and kept in cold stone rooms in chests full of lavender pouches. Therefore, the sheet carries not only a fabric, but also the memory of that cold chest it was stored in, and that icy river it was washed into your bed. When you get inside, you have to dissolve the coolness of winter, permeated into the pores of that fabric with your own body heat. When you settle completely inside the bed, a silent war begins between your body and the sheet, while your back, legs, and arms try to defeat the coldness at the points they contact. With your slightest movement, your skin touches a fresh and cold area of the sheet that hasn't warmed up yet. This is like a slow and cautious dance, lasting until you create a safe island to warm up inside the bed. When you extend your feet, that taut and slippery texture of the sheet creates a ring of coolness on your heels. However, with the pressure of the heavy quilts on you, this linen fabric sticks completely to your body and leaves no place to escape. This pressure makes the coldness even more perceptible, because no air gap remains between your fabric and your skin. Conduction rises to the highest level. However, over time, as minutes progress, this sharp coldness leaves its place to an indescribable freshness, and then to a warm softness equalized with your body heat. That initial hostile attitude of the linen softens with your heat, and starts to act like a second layer of your skin. Thanks to its smooth texture, it slides over your skin without being crushed under the weight of woolen blankets. Now that icy feeling is gone, replaced by a crisp and clean warmth, this transition is a sensory journey made from cold to hot, from tension to relaxation. Inside this white and now warmed cocoon, purified from the dirt and chaos of the world outside, you calm down by feeling those fine fibres in the texture of the sheet. That shiver created by the first contact leaves its place to a deep and peaceful acceptance. The sheet is no longer a stranger making you cold, but a part of you wrapping and protecting you, coming to life with your heat. Right after that first sharp and freezing contact of the linen sheet, servants approach from both sides of the bed and start covering you with the heaviest and most effective line of defense of the night. That is, multi-layered wool blankets. These blankets are nothing like the synthetic covers of today that fluff up like light puffs and whose presence is barely felt, or down duvets. These are massive textile blocks woven on tight looms with the coarsest and densest form of sheep wool, each heavy enough to fix a human to the ground on its own. When the first layer is laid on you, you feel a physical pressure on your body. When the second and third layers are added, this pressure turns into a sweet and irresistible force, nailing you to the bed. As if not just a cover but a layer of warm and soft soil is being laid on you. Your shoulders, chest and legs slowly get crushed and relax under this weight. This weight is not a disturbing burden. On the contrary, it is a feeling of a cocoon, an armor that makes you feel safe and physically isolates you from the outside world. This intense feeling of weight creates a primitive and deep calming effect on your nervous system. Even if cold air currents wandering among shadows inside the room or unknown rattles make you uneasy, it is so difficult to move under these blankets that your body chooses to surrender helplessly and peacefully. Your muscles release the tension they carried all day without resisting this pressure on you. This method, known as weighted blanket in the modern world and used for therapeutic purposes, is not a luxury but a natural part of survival in a medieval castle. While peasants try to get warm by shivering from cold and constantly moving with a single thinned and hole-ridden cover, this wool mountain on you invites you to absolute immobility. Immobility means heat saving. These heavy wools fix you like a bear going into hibernation. Thus, your body does not spend unnecessary energy and keeps all its heat for vital organs. When you focus carefully on the texture of the wool, you realize that it is not just a fabric, but a living material. Slightly oily natural substances coming from the skin of sheep, namely lanolin, are still present among the tightly woven fibers. While this oily texture makes the blanket resistant to water and moisture, it also spreads a slightly earthy and animal scent to the room. This scent mixes with the wood soot in the fireplace and the lavender scent on the floor, reminding you of the protectiveness of nature. Wool fibres are in such a tight and intertwined state that even the strongest air current created by the storm outside cannot overcome this barrier and reach your skin. Although the surface of the blanket is coarse and rough, you do not feel this hardness thanks to the fine linen sheet underneath and your silk shirt. The only thing you feel is the unshakable warmth provided by that huge mass. Later in the night, this feeling of weight loosens the bond between your mind and body. The pressure on your chest slows down your breathing. It drops your heartbeats to a rhythmic and calm tempo. It is as if the blankets whisper to you that there is nothing left to fight anymore, just sleep. The metallic and cold feeling of trust a knight feels when he dons his armour is replaced here by the warm and soft pressure of wool. Turning inside the bed, changing position requires great effort, and that's why most of the time you stay motionless until morning on your back or in the fetal position where you are. This forced immobility helps you descend into the deepest layers of sleep. As the layers on you increase, you move that much further away from the cold reality of the room. While stones crack outside, you get lost in an untouchable peace at the centre of your own warmth and weight under this mountain of wool. The most magnificent and wild layer of the night is about to be added onto the rough and safe protection provided by wool blankets. As servants approach the bed with huge weights in their arms, a slight musk-like animal scent that burns, the nasal passage suddenly spreads into the room's air. These are the pelts of beings that managed to survive the harshest winters of nature, namely bears, wolves, sables, and lynxes. After the coolness of linen and the rough texture of wool, the laying of these fur covers on the bed is the final and heaviest seal of the sleep preparation ritual. These pelts covered over you as a king are not ordinary covers. In fact, they are a biological technology brought from the depths of the forest, evolved over millions of years against the cold. When servants lay these heavy masses on top of the bed, over the walls, you feel the pressure on your body double, and even the expansion of your ribcage becomes difficult. This weight is a sweet prison that pushes you towards the depths of the bed and makes escape impossible. While the peasants of the period might try to warm up trembling by taking a single hardened, untanned sheepskin on their shoulders, these furs in your bed are a hierarchy of wealth and heat arranged layer by layer. Sable or ermine furs, which usually have softer and denser hairs, are placed at the very bottom, closest to the wool. These act as a tight lining that holds heat and does not let air through. On top, bear or wolf pelts that defy the harshest winds of winter are laid. The long and oily hairs in this outer layer shed the moisture and cold air currents in the room like a slippery surface. While lying under these layers, you actually wear nature's most durable armours over your own skin. That dense structure of the fur compresses the air between the wool blankets and turns your body heat into a thermal core from which escape is impossible. The feeling created by these covers is not only warmth, but also a primitive sense of security. Fur does not breathe like wool. It traps heat and does not reflect it back. The temperature generated inside the bed reaches a tropical intensity completely independent of the freezing room outside. When you take your hand out from under the quilt and touch the surface of these furs, your fingers get lost among those long hairs. These hairs glowing in the torchlight are electric and tense, as if they are still alive. No matter how severe the storm outside is, just as the animals owning these pelts survived in that cold, you survive under their borrowed skins. The weight of the furs is so great that turning right or left requires great physical effort. Therefore, your body surrenders to absolute immobility, a hibernation mode that saves energy. Sometimes the heat inside the bed rises so much that despite the sub-zero air outside, a thin layer of sweat may form on your forehead. This is the victory of life in a castle surrounded by deadly cold. That slight wild scent emitted by the furs mixes with lavender and incense smells, creating an intoxicating, heavy atmosphere in the room. This scent reminds you of that wild world beyond the thin walls of civilization, the ancient cycle between predator and prey. But now you are not the hunter, but a creature hidden in the depths of a safe den under the protection of these pelts. When the furs are pulled up to your neck, that soft tickling you feel on your face and that massive mass on you completely tear you away from the outside world. There are no longer kingdoms, wars, or troubles. There is only your warmth, the silent weight of the furs, and a deep, holeless darkness waiting for you. A silent and vital operation started by servants hours before you even entered the room has come into play to break that freezing coldness of your bed. Large river stones or custom-made clay bricks, placed in the embers of the blazing fire in the room's huge fireplace since sunset, are kept there until they reach a hellish temperature. These stones are nature's simplest batteries that trap heat inside and release it very slowly. Servants take these glowing stones from the fire with thick tongs. They clean the ash and soot on them and then wrap them in thick wool cloths or old flannel fabric so they don't burn. These packaged heat sources are strategically placed under the quilt and furs, especially at the foot end and the area where your back will be, before you get into bed. This practice is the pinnacle of the heating technology of the era. Because when it is impossible to heat the air, heating the surface to be contacted directly is the only solution. While peasants benefit from their body heat by sleeping in the same room with their animals, you warm up with artificial suns created by these stones fresh out of embers inside your bed. When you get into bed and extend your feet, not an ice-cold sheet, but that intense, dry and deep heat radiating from these stones welcomes you at that farthest and coldest point. When you rest your soles against this cloth-wrapped stone, you feel the heat spreading from your fingertips upwards to your legs and your whole body, and your blood circulation accelerating. This is not a warmth coming from outside. It is a guardian placed in the heart of the bed. The position of the stones is not random. Servants arrange them to correspond to the parts of your body that get coldest. Sometimes one is placed aligned with your kidneys, one under your feet, and another by your side to warm your hands. Bumping into these hard and hot masses while moving in the bed reminds you that you are not alone in the bed, that a piece of fire is under the sheets with you. The stones do not burn your skin thanks to the fabrics they are wrapped in. However, the heat they emit is so strong that it heats the air under the quilt like an oven. This heat is not fluctuating and temporary like a fireplace fire. By the nature of stone, it is stable, heavy, and long-lasting. As the night progresses and the cold outside tries to leak and approach the bear, these stones continue to remain warm. Even when that burning heat of the stones leaves its place to a slight lukewarmness towards the morning, their presence has dried the moisture inside the bed, warmed the sheets, and provided the thermal support you need in the most critical first hours of sleep. Sometimes, in the deepest part of sleep, you touch that stone with your foot and realize that it still maintains its warmth like a loyal sentry there. These simple pieces of stone serve a much more valuable function than the palace's magnificent architecture or expensive tapestries. They are the petrified souls of fire hidden inside your bed against that relentless cold of the winter night. Hugging these hot stones, you fall into a peaceful dream as if sleeping in the bosom of fire in the frozen silence of the castle. In that final preparation stage just before getting into bed, the silence of the room is divided by a metallic clatter and friction sound. Round pans made of polished copper or brass with perforated lids at the tip of long wooden handles appear in the hands of servants. These are mobile heat tools exploring the cold geography of the bed, known as bed warmers or braziers. Coals and embers taken from the hottest part of the fireplace are carefully filled into these copper reservoirs. When the lid is closed, thanks to the conductivity of copper, the metal instantly becomes too hot to touch and starts emitting an intense heat wave along with thin, grey smoke out of its holes. Unlike the stones left fixed inside the bed, this tool is the leading actor of an active heating ritual. The servant inserts this long-handled heater under the quilts and furs and moves it back and forth between the sheets on the mattress with skillful movements. While the metal pan slides over linen sheets, it leaves behind a hot trace like ironed fabric that burns fingers when touched. This movement destroys all cold air pockets inside the bed. It evaporates moisture and makes the sheets crisp and warm, almost like baked bread. That rustling sound the copper makes while rubbing against the sheet is the harbinger of approaching comfort for you. While people in non-noble houses of the period get into their cold beds and wait to warm up with their own body heat, you have the privilege of entering a bed where pre-prepared heat is distributed homogeneously. This process ensures heat is carried to every corner of the bed, from the foot end to the head pillow. Sometimes dried lavender seeds, apple peels or cinnamon sticks are thrown into the coals inside the heater. Along with the heating copper, these aromatic materials burn and trap a magnificent scent inside the bed. When you lift the quilt and get inside, that wave of hot air hitting your face is not only hot air, but also a smoked, spicy, and peaceful perfume. This scent remains suspended in that closed space inside the bed until morning. The servant's attention is at the highest level, while the copper pan is moved inside the bed. Because holding the pan at a single point for too long can burn or yellow the expensive linen sheets. Therefore, the movements made are rhythmic, fluid, and continuous. It is like a blessing ceremony for the bed. Even after the heating process is finished and the pan is removed from the bed, the intense heat emitted by that copper remains suspended in the sheets for a long time. When you get into bed, your body encounters not a cold shock but an embracing warmth. It is as if a piece of the sun slept there just before you and left its place to you. This preheating allows your body to preserve the energy it would spend to warm up. It relaxes your muscles without the need for shivering. No matter how much the wind howls outside, the inside of the bed is safe, dry, and inviting thanks to the hot traces left by that copper pan. This ritual is a transition ceremony repeated every night where technology and human labor unite against the cold, preparing you for sleep in the softest way. When you fall asleep in the layered and heated depths of your bed, that ancient being living inside the huge stone fireplace at the other end of the room, namely the fire, gives its own struggle for life throughout the night. This fire is not only a heat source, but the heart, light, and breath of the room. However, when left to its own devices, fire is a capricious creature prone to going out or getting out of control. That is why there is an almost invisible sentry moving silently in the shadows of the room while you sleep. The duty of this servant or stoker is to keep that flame alive until morning, but never allow it to flare up enough to wake you, or suffocate the room in smoke. While the huge logs inside the fireplace slowly burn and turn into embers, a delicate balance is established between the room's heat and the fire's lifespan. In simple houses of the period, when night comes, the fire is covered with ash and put to sleep. It would be revived in the morning. This meant the inside of the house cooling down as much as the outside throughout the night. However, in the royal bedroom, the fire never sleeps. It is only dimmed. While the sentry stirs the embers with the tongs in his hand, he pays maximum attention so that the sound of metal rubbing against stone does not come out. When a new log is added, it is vital that the wood is dry and resin-free. Because wet wood crackles, pops, and scatters sparks into the room, this can interrupt your sleep. Therefore, the woods to be burned at night are oak or hornbeam logs specially selected and dried for years. Instead of burning with flames and noise, these woods burn inwardly, slowly and steadily, radiating deep heat to the room. That orange and flickering light emanating from the fireplace creates long shadows dancing on the stone walls of the room, on the tapestries and on the curtains of your bed. You feel these light changes behind your eyelids while sleeping. The fire shining too much can illuminate the room unnecessarily and keep you awake. Its going out means the room surrendering to a deadly cold. The sentry has to maintain this light balance as well. While the intensity of the light is reduced with perforated metal shields placed in front of the fire or piled ashes, the spread of heat is ensured. This is a primitive thermostat setting. It is a heat management lasting until morning done by human hand and estimation. While you are in your dreams, that red eye at the mouth of the fireplace is the sole guardian protecting you from the teeth of the cold. Besides all these heating efforts, the comfort created by the fireplace, torches and heaters, an insidious and invisible price is paid inside the room. Air quality. This room, insulated with thick stone walls, tightly closed shutters, layered curtains, tapestries, has very few exit points where smoke and soot can escape. Although the fireplace chimney draws most of the smoke, back puffs leaking inside with the change of wind direction, fuming, and thin smoke columns rising from the candles around your bed make the room's air heavy over time. The air you inhale while sleeping is not the crystal clear and sharp winter air outside, but a dense and hazy mixture full of burnt wood, melted tallow, soot and dust particles. This is the inevitable atmosphere of medieval winter nights. Staying warm means inhaling a bit of smoke. This heavy air directly affects your sleep quality and dreams. The drop in oxygen levels, along with the slight increase in carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, drives you into a deeper, fainting-like sleep than normal. This is a lethargic reaction of the brain to oxygen deprivation rather than a restful sleep. That headache you feel when you wake up in the morning, the metallic taste in your mouth and the cloudiness in your mind are the result of this smoked air you breathed throughout the night. Although physicians of the period call this night fever or heavy spirits, it is actually the physiological result of insufficient ventilation. While airflow is provided through holes in the roof in peasants' huts, your luxurious and closed room is actually a smoke chamber slowly filling up. When the curtains of your bed are closed, the air inside becomes even more stagnant. Your own breath and the smell of the heaters inside your bed concentrate in this narrow space. Sometimes the smell of that throat-burning smoke coming from the fireplace increases so much that you cough and stir in your sleep. However, the cold is such a great threat that no one dares to open the window and ventilate the room. Heat is more valuable than fresh air. Smoke is the loyal but toxic shadow of heat. This hazy atmosphere adds a mystical and uncanny air to the room. Torchlights hit smoke particles in the air, creating beams of light. It softens shadows and blurs everything like a dream realm. You lose your perception of time and space inside this smoky cocoon. With every breath you take, you inhale the smell of burning oak, old stones and wool. This is a dense and textured sleep experience where every breath has a weight, very far from the sterile and odourless bedrooms of the modern world. These shutters are like miniature copies of the castle's rampart gates rather than a window sash. These covers, made of thick oak wood reinforced with iron bands and covered with pitch, are the crudest but most vital mechanism preventing the white apocalypse outside from entering the room. At that time, glass was a fragile luxury found in rare small pieces joined with lead, having almost no thermal insulation. Therefore, on winter nights, the main protection is provided not by the glass itself, but by these massive wooden blocks bolted from the inside. While lying in your bed, you hear the storm outside hitting these shutters with all its might, and the wood stretching and creaking. This sound is the sound of nature pounding on the door to get inside. Those millimetric gaps remaining between the edges of the shutters and the stone windowsill are battlefields where the wind looks for an opportunity to leak inside. Although servants have plugged these gaps with old pieces of cloth, balls of wool, or beeswax, the pressure of the wind is so strong that sometimes you feel the shutters shaking and a thin ice-like air knife leaking inside. However, if this wooden barrier did not exist, the room would turn into a snow cave in seconds. In peasants' houses, windows usually consist of just holes and are covered with animal skin or oiled paper. The wind easily passes through these thin membranes and fills inside, whereas these oak blocks in your room turn the howling of the wind into a muffled moan. When the shutters are closed, the room is completely insulated not only from the cold but also from the light. The inside is buried in pitch darkness where the concept of time is lost. When you look closely at the texture of the wood, you realize how the cracks, knots and iron nails on its surface have been worn down by years of rain and frost events. These shutters not only cut the wind, but also try to prevent the heat inside the room from escaping to that infinite void outside. They try to hold the warm air pool inside like a dam gate. On stormy nights, the jingling of the iron latches on the shutters with the change of wind direction rhythmically interrupts the silence in the room. This sound reminds you of what wild weather reigns outside and causes you to wrap yourself tighter under your quilts. That deep stone window recess right in front of the shutters is the coldest point of the room. That is the neutral zone between the outside and the inside. While looking at that dark wooden wall from your safe bed, you imagine the chaos behind it and realize what a thin line that few centimeters of wood in between is keeping you alive. The location of this room where you sleep in that complex and labyrinth-like castle was never chosen by chance. While building this room, architects and stonemasons calculated the direction of the compass, the corridors where the wind prevails, and most importantly, where the pale winter face of the sun shows itself. Your bedroom is a strategic shelter usually placed on the south or southeast facade, facing the castle's most sheltered inner courtyard. Against those relentless freezing and humid winds coming from the north, the back of the room leans against massive blind walls, towers or other service buildings. Thus, the cold wind cannot directly hit the walls of the room. It has to overcome other obstacles first, losing its speed and power. This architectural shield is a vital detail that keeps the room temperature a few degrees higher, even if you are not aware of it. While the soldiers of the period stomped their feet not to freeze in their watch posts in the north-facing watchtowers where the wind cuts their faces like a razor, your room stands at an angle that can absorb those meager lights of the winter sun throughout the day. Sunlight leaking through the clouds during the day licks the outer surface of the thick walls, warming them slightly.
Stone has a memory. It releases this little heat it absorbed during the day back into the room, very slowly when night comes.
If your room faced north, the stones would never warm up. On the contrary, they would turn into ice molds, constantly storing the cold. Also, royal bedrooms are usually located on intermediate floors, above the ground floor but below that freezing cold of the roof. You're at the point closest to the building's thermal core, away from the moisture of the soil on the ground and the frost of the roof. The location of the room is also adjusted according to the castle's kitchen or the great hall with the large fireplace. It is often built near walls where large kitchen chimneys or massive hearths on the lower floor pass, so that waste heat rising from the chimney tempers the walls of the bedroom. This is a very primitive, indirect and accidental version of the modern underfloor heating systems. When you put your hand on a certain part of the wall, you can feel that it is warmer than other places. That is the vein of warmth coming from the heart of the castle. The room facing the inner courtyard also reduces the noise of storms. While the wind howls on the outer walls, beating the waves or trees, the wind coming to your window is broken, tired, and calmed down. While lying in your bed, you sleep with the feeling of being in the center provided by this positioning. The cold hits the guards, servants, animals in the outer circle. But thanks to the stone geometry and direction calculation of the castle, it loses its power until it reaches you. You are under the protection of the sun and architecture at the warmest, most secluded and calculated point of this stone labyrinth. When you feel those curtains surrounding your bed and separating you from the rest of the room between your fingers, you understand that they are not ordinary pieces of fabric, but have a structure almost as solid and dense as a wall. These curtains are usually made of velvet, heavy brocade or tightly woven wool, and are so thick that they completely block light, sound, and most importantly, airflow. The weight of the fabric is evident from its draped stance. Its hard folds defying gravity stand motionless as if carved from stone. When you touch it, your fingers sink into that dense pile. This texture has absorbed the dust and smoke smell in the room, becoming heavy and hardened over time. Unlike the thin tulle curtains of the modern world, these are textile armors. Its purpose is not to show the outside, but to completely destroy the outside. Although the inner surface of the curtains is sometimes lined with softer silk or linen, the outer surface exhibits a rough resistance against the cold. The pores of the fabric are so tight that it is difficult even for air molecules to pass through. This density physically prevents the hot air inside the bed from leaking out and the cold air outside from entering. When you close the curtains and bring them together, that solid and muffled sound made by the fabrics rubbing against each other heralds that insulation has begun. The heavy embroideries, gold or silver threads on the fabric are not only indicators of wealth, but also elements adding an extra layer and weight to the fabric. Each embroidery increases the surface area of the fabric and contributes to insulation at a microscopic level. Another feature of these heavy fabrics is preserving that unique smell and atmosphere created by stagnant air. Since the air remaining inside the curtains does not mix with the air outside, the fabric's own smell combines with the lavender inside the bed and your skin scent to form an intense aura. The second skin you wear on your own body before entering that warm and layered world of the bed is just as important as the quilts. The light pajamas of modern times or the habit of sleeping naked mean inviting mortal danger in these frozen castles. Before going to bed, you get rid of the weight of daytime clothes and wear a loose-fitting and long-sleeved nightshirt extending to your ankles. This shirt is woven from raw linen and wraps your body loosely like a sack without constricting it. The reason for choosing linen is not a coincidence. Unlike wool, it does not irritate the skin. When you sweat, it rapidly absorbs moisture and removes it from the body. Sweating and staying wet in a cold room is the fastest way to freeze. That's why the linen shirt is like a regulator ensuring your thermal balance. The most distinctive feature of this shirt is its length. While its descent to your feet prevents your legs from touching each other or the cold sheet, it is sometimes fixed with laces passed between the legs so that it does not ride up during sleep. Sleeves extend to your wrists and sometimes are gathered to include your fingers as well. This closeness guarantees that no point of your body remains naked. On very cold nights, a second dressing gown or vest-like layer made of finer wool can be added over this linen shirt. This logic of layered clothing aims to trap body heat by creating air pockets. While peasants often sleep in dust and dirt with their daytime clothes, this clean and special nightwear of yours is both a hygienic barrier and a status symbol. The neck part of the shirt is usually closed by gathering with a string, thus cold air leakage from the shoulders inside is prevented. That crisp and cool feeling of linen when first worn gives way to a softness integrated with your body heat shortly after getting into bed. While turning in the bed, the loose fabric of the shirt moves with you. Sometimes it tangles around your legs, but even this tangling feeling makes you feel the warmth of an extra fabric layer. The texture of linen is a breathing membrane standing between you and the outside world, not crushed under the weight of quilts. Your skin does not burn directly when it touches those heated stones or the hot trace of the copper heater inside the bed. Because this linen layer transmits heat to you by softening it. Although you look like wrapped in a shroud inside this white and long shirt, you are actually inside a cocoon protecting life and warmth. While your whole body is under protection under quilts, furs and curtains, only 1 point remains in contact with that freezing room air outside, your head. The human body loses a large part of its heat from the head region, and if you sleep with your head exposed, that enormous heat inside the bed has no meaning. The cold starts entering through your head and making your whole body shiver. That is why the final part of the sleep ritual is the nightcap you put on your head. This is not an accessory that the present day finds funny or old-fashioned, but a vital necessity for that era. Usually made of tightly woven linen or fine wool, this cap is designed to completely cover your ears, forehead and the nape of your neck. Thanks to its strings tied under your chin, no matter how much you turn at night, it does not slip off your head. The moment you put on the cap, that pressure and feeling of closure on your ears muffles the sounds of the outside world a bit more. You start hearing your own breathing and heartbeat more clearly. This acoustic introspection accelerates the transition to sleep. The fabric of the cap traps the air between your hair and prevents your scalp from cooling down. If you don't wear a cap, the tip of your nose and your earlobes start to ache in that ice-cold air of the room. Since ears are regions with low blood circulation, they are the parts most prone to freezing. This cap protects them as if they were inside a warm palm. This is the reason why everyone is depicted with a hat in bed in the paintings of the period. This is not a fashion, but a survival reflex. Sometimes, in very harsh winters, a second wool hood or a piece of cape extending down to the shoulders can be worn over this cap. By completely covering the neck area as well, it seals that dangerous opening remaining between the quilt and the head. The fabric of the cap is usually lined on the inside to absorb sweat throughout the night. When you put your head on the pillow, the sound of the wool cap rubbing against the pillow is heard like a rustling lullaby right next to your ears. This cap protects you not only from the cold, but also from insects, spiders, and dust and crumbs that might fall from the ceiling. When you close your eyes and surrender to the darkness, this tight knot and warm fabric on your head give you the confidence that I am covered everywhere. I have no exposed points. If your body is a castle, this cap is the roof on the highest tower of that castle. Without it, the defense remains incomplete, and the cold definitely leaks in through that open door. When you put on your nightcap and lay your head on the pillow, you need to take care of the weakest link in your body's heat management, namely your feet. The heart wants to keep the warm blood it pumps in the center of your body in your vital organs, and that's why it pulls blood from the extremities, from fingers and toes. If your feet are bare, no matter how warm it is under the quilts, your whole body continues to shiver because of that ice-cold blood circulation. Therefore, while preparing for sleep, you take off the thin socks you wore during the day and put on thick, almost felt-like wool socks knitted specifically for wearing only in bed. These socks are wool tubes far from aesthetics, focused only on functionality, reaching well above your ankles and sometimes up to your knees. The moment you put them on your feet, you feel that characteristic, slightly scratchy but reassuring texture of wool. This itch is actually like a primitive massage calling blood flow to that area by slightly stimulating your skin. While peasants often try to sleep by wrapping pieces of cloth around their feet or wearing animal skin moccasins, these socks you wear are airtight thermal boots woven with tight stitches by master hands. The thickness of the sock is so great that when you move your toes touch the wool layer in between, not each other. This insulation prevents your toes from feeling each other's coldness and keeps each toe warm separately. When you extend your feet inside the bed, thanks to this wool armour, you don't feel that shock even if you touch those cold areas of the sheet that haven't warmed up yet. Socks act as a barrier between the cool skin and the cold sheet. The natural oils in the wool and the air trapped by the fibres circulate the heat of your feet within itself. It is as if your feet are living in their own small and warm climate, independent of the rest of your body. Over time, as the heat inside the bed increases, you feel the veins in your feet expanding and that freezing sensation leaving its place to a sweet tingling and then a deeper relaxation. Warming of your feet is the biological key to falling asleep. When your feet warm up, the signal that you are safe now, you can sleep, goes to your brain. Inside these thick wools, you dive into dreams as if taking a soft and warm step. erasing the memory of the stone floor and frozen ground outside. Inside the room, there is another heat source, much more lively, mobile and high-calorie than what the fireplace and furs can provide. Your loyal hunting dogs.
As a king, your bedroom is a shelter not only for you, but also for your most precious greyhounds and mastiffs. These animals are there not only for security, but also for the enormous body heat they emit.
A dog's body's temperature is a few degrees higher than a human's, and this turns them into literally living radiators on a cold winter night. When you get into your bed, a few of these huge animals lie curled up at the foot of the bed, sometimes even on the quilt. Their weight adds to the weight of the blankets and fixes you even more to the bed. That rhythmic breathing you hear in the dark is like a peaceful metronome breaking the silence in the room. With the dog leaning its back against your legs, that intense, moist and animal warmth radiating from it overcomes the layers of the quilt and reaches you. This is a living warmth with the beating pulse that a mechanical heater cannot give. The phrase three-dog night, one of the English idioms of the period, describes that 3 dogs should be taken into bed to keep warm in very cold weather. This is not a metaphor. It is a survival strategy applied not to freeze. While peasants warm up with the breath of cows and sheep in barns, you must be embraced by the furry warmth of these noble animals. The scent emitted by the dogs mixes with the soot and lavender smell permeated in the room, creating a more primitive, musky odor. The smell of wet fur and earth reminds you of the hunting parties outside and the wildness of the forest. But right now, that wildness is tamed and has entered your service. When you rest your feet against the dog's warm belly, the energy radiating from that living flesh dissolves, your muscles stiffened from the cold. When they shiver slightly while dreaming or move their paws, these small earthquakes occurring inside the bed make you feel that you are not alone. Knowing that they will wake up and growl in a moment of danger relaxes your mind and allows you to sleep deeper. Inside these thick walls, you dive into dreams as if taking a soft and warm step, erasing the memory of the stone floor and frozen ground outside. Long before you enter the room and step into that magnificent bed, someone else, a shadow, has been there for you. This is the invisible but vital effort of your servant or chambermaid charged with warming this bed. In cases where copper heaters are insufficient or not used, human heat, the oldest and most effective heating method, comes into play. A servant enters your bed hours before you come, hides under the quilts, and prepares those ice-cold sheets, mattresses, and pillows for you with their own body heat. Although this seems like a strange intimacy, it is a completely mechanical task for that period. The service duty is not to sleep, but to produce heat like an oven. That is why they constantly move inside the bed. They increase the heat with friction and cook the area where you will lie with their own existence.
This sacrifice is made so that you do not enter an ice-cold well. When the servant leaves the bed, only that intense, moist, and living warmth remaining from their body is left behind.
When you get into bed, you do not experience the cold shock of the sheets. A familiar warmth welcomes you as if you yourself were there just before you. While ordinary people of the period enter their beds shivering and wait to warm up with their teeth chattering, you settle into a ready nest warmed by someone else's biological energy. That feeling of lived-in experience the servant leaves in the bed, the slight depression on the pillow, and the wrinkles under the quilt are the proofs of this invisible service. Sometimes this duty can also take the form of standing by the bed and rubbing the sheets with hands like ironing ceaselessly for minutes to create friction heat instead of getting inside the bed. But the goal is always the same. The king's skin must never touch cold fabric. This preparation also removes the moisture inside the bed. The servant's body heat evaporates the dampness inside the linen sheets. When you enter the room, the servant glides away like a shadow and disappears, but the heat they left is the greatest luxury facilitating your falling asleep. This is the form of hierarchy transformed into heat transfer. The energy of the one at the very bottom is sacrificed for the comfort of the one at the very top. As you settle into that warmth, you enjoy the comfort without knowing that you are actually borrowing someone else's life force. The last ritual just before sitting on the bed and pulling the quilts over you is the serving of a special elixir, namely Hippocras, which will warm your insides and accelerate your blood.
This is not an ordinary table wine. It is a medicinal mixture into which cinnamon, ginger, cloves, black pepper, and honey are mixed, boiled, strained, and served steaming. Drinking water at that time meant inviting disease. Therefore, alcohol was both a safe liquid and a medicine. When you take the silver goblet served by the servant, the heat of the metal burns your palms. When that intense spicy steam rising from the goblet hits your face, a sharp scent burning your nasal passage fills your lungs. Even this scent alone is enough to cut through the cold and damp air of the room like a knife. When you take the first sip of the wine, the hot liquid flows down your throat like a river of fire. The black pepper and ginger inside create a physical burning sensation in your throat, and when this feeling reaches your stomach, it turns into a false but effective wave of heat wrapping your whole body. Alcohol dilates your veins, causing blood to rush to your skin. Your cheeks turn red, your hands and feet start to tingle. According to the medicine of the period, spices are hot and dry in nature, and provide the body's balance against the cold and damp diseases brought by winter. While peasants might be content with a cloudy beer or cold water, this mixture full of expensive spices you drink acts as an internal combustion stove. The sweetness of the wine comes from honey, and while this sugar loading gives you instant energy, the sedative effect of alcohol slows down your mind. The shadows of the room soften, the sound of the wind moves away. When you finish the goblet, that heavy and warm punch you feel in your stomach is like an anchor, pulling you towards sleep. The taste of cinnamon and cloves remaining in your mouth mixes with the taste of the herbs with which you cleaned your teeth. This drink is a preparation designed not only to quench thirst, but to artificially raise body temperature and encourage you to enter that freezing bed. When you get under the quilt with your muscles relaxed and skin warmed by the effect of alcohol, it is now much more difficult for the cold outside to reach you, because you have carried that hot fire inside you to the bed. The secret of surviving and staying warm on medieval winter nights is hidden, not only in external measures, but also in the fuel you lower into your stomach, that is, in dinner. The royal table does not bring light salads or boiled vegetables before you. In these harshest days of winter, the menu includes whole game meats roasted on fire, stews with rich sauces, fatty bacon and stuffed geese. This diet, rich in heavy protein and especially fat, serves a purely thermogenic purpose. When you consume these fatty and heavy meals, your body turns the digestive system into a huge factory.
The digestion process is one of the processes where the body spends the most energy and therefore produces the most internal heat. While your stomach works to break down those huge pieces of meat, it almost lights a small stove inside your belly. That irresistible weight and lethargy settling on you a few hours after the meal is the result of the digestive system gathering all the blood in the stomach. This is called meat drunkenness. Your eyelids get heavy, your movements slow down. This physiological state is an excellent preparation for sleeping in a cold bedroom. Since your body is busy with digestion, your metabolism continues to work in high gear, and this ensures a stable body temperature that will last until morning. While the poor people go to bed with thin vegetable soups and black bread, and wake up with hunger and cold at midnight, this intense fuel in your stomach keeps you warm until morning. However, this heavy diet also has a price. Dreams, fatty meals, and meats eaten late at night increase body temperature, while also triggering brain activity, which leads to a condition called meat sweats and nightmares. In the middle of the night, while it is freezing outside, you may wake up in sweat inside the bed and try to get rid of the effect of those gothic and complex dreams you had. The rumbling of your stomach echoes in the silence of the room. Still, this is a much better option than freezing. The satiety and internal warmth given by those heavy meals support that microclimate under the quilts. While you sleep, your body fights a biological war against the stone walls of the castle by burning that venison or fatty sauce. This is a calorie-loaded defense measure taken against the winter night rather than a meal eaten for pleasure. Around your bed, there are small but effective heat islands, showing a flickering resistance against that pitch darkness of the night. Candles. These candles are not cold and constant light sources, like the electric lighting of the modern world. They are living beings that heat the air around them while burning, change shape, and measure time as they are consumed. Those used in the royal room are not those cheap tallow candles used by peasants and servants that emit a heavy, sooty and suffocating smell of animal fat when burned. Those burning at your bedside are expensive treasures produced with the labour of bees, made of pure beeswax, which do not burn the nasal passage when burned, but on the contrary, leave a sweet, honeyed and warm aroma in the air. The flame of these candles is brighter, cleaner and hotter than tallow. While lying in your bed, you feel that small heat sphere created by these flames on your face. Although the heat radiating from the candles is not enough to heat the whole room, it creates a microscopic, mild climate right around your bed, in the airspace you breathe. That blue and orange dance at the tip of the flame heats the air and sends a thin current upwards. This current slowly moves the air inside the bed curtains. It prevents stagnant and cold air from settling. When you bring your hand close to the candle, you realize the power of that small fire. It is the smallest representative of the sun on earth. Servants cut and trim the wicks of these candles with special scissors throughout the night to ensure the flame burns without drowning, without producing soot, and by giving maximum heat. The light of the candles refracts in the damp and hazy air in the room, creating halos around it. This image creates a hypnotic effect, making your eyelids heavy. Every flicker of the flame is a sign of invisible air currents in the room, those insidious wind leaks. The candle is not only a source of heat and light for you, but also a barometer showing that the room is breathing. If the flame suddenly leans to the side, you know that a cold breath has entered from somewhere. For the people of the period, this flame also serves as a spiritual shield, keeping the monsters in the darker way. As the candles melt later in the night, their height shortens, and the liquefied beeswax forms small hot lakes in the plate of the candlestick.
The smell of this melted beeswax combines with other smells in the room, with the smell of lavender, fir and soot completing that unique, heavy and sleep-inducing atmosphere of the bedroom. You inhale this scent as you fall asleep. That yellow and warm light emitted by the candle softens the grey and hostile colour, the cold stone walls. It transforms the room into a more acceptable, more humane space. No matter how wild the storm outside is, the stable stance of that small flame at your bedside whispers to you that civilization and warmth still exist. You dive into beeswax-scented dreams under the protection of this light and halos. When you close your eyes and focus on silence, you hear that the castle is actually not silent at all, but on the contrary, it constantly moans, creaks, and speaks like a huge petrified monster. On winter nights, the freezing breath outside physically affects those enormous stone blocks of the castle.
Stones that warm up relatively, or at least relax during the day, shrink and clench each other tighter when the night frost hits. This thermal contraction causes deep, thudding sounds coming from the depths of the walls, and sometimes sharp cracking sounds resembling a rifle shot. While lying in your bed, you hear these sounds coming from the vaulted ceiling above your head, or from those thick walls protecting you. It is as if the castle is squeezing its bones under the punches of the cold. This is not like those light clicks of modern buildings. This is the sound of tons of weight displacing. The wind is the head soloist of the castle's acoustic world. While circling around the towers, passing through the battlements, and diving into narrow chimneys, it makes whistles, roars and moans, each in a different tone. The sound of the wind inside the chimney sometimes resembles the howling of a distant wolf pack, and sometimes the moan of a person in pain. These sounds can be interpreted as the voices of ghosts or spirits in that day where superstitions were strong, causing you to hide even deeper under your quilt. In peasants' huts, the wind is shriller and closer while shaking thin walls. However, in the castle, the sound of the wind echoes in stone corridors, grows, becomes muffled, and turns into a hum of uncertain origin spreading everywhere. Wooden floors and ceiling beams also participate in this winter symphony. Temperature changes cause massive oak beams to stretch and suddenly burst with a loud noise. This sound is so strong in the silence of the night that it can startle you from your sleep. Also, the clatter of metal armours and heavy steps of the guards patrolling in the stone corridors outside the room echo on the stone floor and reach you. This rhythmic sound reminds you that you are safe on the one hand. On the other hand, it emphasises the reality of that cold and harsh outside world. The slight creaking of door hinges with the pressure of the wind, the straining of window shutters, all these sounds are acoustic proofs of the castle's endless war with nature. The silence inside the room is heavy enough to contrast with this noise outside. Since tapestries and curtains absorb sounds, the slightest crackle inside, an ember falling from the fireplace, or a dog's sigh is heard with disproportionate clarity. But when it snows, all sound from the outside world is suddenly cut off. Snow wrapped the castle like a sound-absorbing blanket. That is when the castle's own internal sounds, those deep moans of the stones, become even more evident. Among these sounds, knowing that the castle resists the cold for you, you try to sleep by listening to the language of stone and wood. Under the soft luxury of the goose-down bed and the warmth wrapping you lies a much cruder and more primitive layer that is invisible but forms the basis of the system, the straw mattress.
This first layer, laid on those hard and spaced boards of the wooden frame of the bed, is called a pass, and it is obtained by filling tightly woven coarse linen or hemp sacks with pressed wheat stalks, corn, cob leaves, or dry reeds. The duty of this layer is not to offer you comfort.
Its duty is to cut the cold air current coming from below and prevent the expensive goose-down bed on top from being cut or deformed by wooden slats. Although you think you are lying on clouds, you are actually lying on a straw pile. This straw filling is the most common bedding material of the period, and peasants usually sleep only on this. However, in your bed, this is an insulation barrier. Straws are hollow inside, and this tubular structure is an excellent air prison. The air rising from that cold void under the bed hits this compressed straw mass and loses its speed. Straw does not provide conduction, it keeps it where it is. Although it gets crushed and hardened over time with the weight on it, it continues to preserve its thermal property. That deep, rustling and fragile sound you hear every time you turn in bed comes from this straw layer underneath. This sound is a rural and natural background noise mixing with the silence of the feather bed. The maintenance of the straw mattress is more difficult and critical than the feather bed, because straw gets dusty and crumbles over time, and if it gets damp, it is very prone to infestation by insects and fleas. Therefore, palace officials completely empty the inside of this mattress several times a year, boil the cover, and fill it with fresh, newly harvested straw, blended with sun-dried and fragrant herbs. During these bed renewal periods, your room smells of freshly cut meadow and earth. This scent suppresses that heavy damp and soot smell for a while. That solid and firm ground you feel when you lie in bed is the merit of this straw mattress. If there were only a feather bed, you would sink in and feel the boards underneath. Straw offers you a spine, a support. On cold winter nights, this vegetal layer is the last fortress preventing your body heat from escaping from below. The feather bed wraps you, wool blankets press you down, furs cover you, but the straw mattress carries you.
Dried stalks, which are nature's simplest waste, form the foundation of a king's sleep. You sleep at the peak of civilization on this jostling and rough pile, without breaking that last physical contact with nature.
The place you rest your head is not a single and low pillow, like in modern beds. On the contrary, a mountain of pillows rising behind you waits for you like a throne. In the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, people did not sleep in a flat horizontal position as we do today. Instead, they slept in a semi-sitting position, with their backs and heads elevated. Although the belief that lying flat mimicked the dead, or the idea of facilitating digestion was effective in choosing this position, there is a much more practical thermal reason on winter nights. To keep your head and chest away from that cold air layer accumulating and moving on the surface of the bed. The height of the pillows is another step physically keeping you above the cold. At the head of the bed, at the very bottom, there is a long pillow called a bolster, cylindrical in shape, and usually filled with straw or wool. This provides the basic support. Above it, softer square or rectangular pillows filled with goose down are stacked in layers. When you get into bed, you lean against this pile of pillows and your body stands at an angle from the waist up. This position makes it easier for quilts and furs to gather more tightly around your neck, wrapping you almost like a shawl.
The cold air leaking through that gap formed between the quilt and neck when lying flat is prevented in the semi-sitting position. The pillows themselves also create a heat barrier around your head.
These pillows you bury your head in offer not only softness, they also protect your ears and cheeks by covering both sides of your head. The enormous heat retention capacity of goose down comes into play here too. The pillows behind and to the sides of your head warm up with the heat radiating from you and return to you like a warm embrace. Although pillowcases are of cold linen again, they warm up quickly with the contact of your face. While the poor of the period wake up with stiff necks on wooden logs or hard straw bags, your head is supported and warmed from all directions among these soft clouds. Sleeping in a semi-sitting position also allows your lungs to open more comfortably. This makes breathing a bit easier while inhaling the smoky and heavy air in the room. Sometimes lavender or dried rose pouches placed inside the pillows, thus a pleasant smell comes to your nose every time you turn your head. This pillow castle protects you not only physically, but also psychologically. That soft wall you lean your back against makes you feel safe. You do not sleep as a small dot, lost inside the bed in the cold of the night, but as a warm and dominant figure rising on your pillows. This pillow fortification around your head and shoulders is the last line of defense against the invisible attacks of winter.
When you lie in your bed and look around in the dimness of the room, you realize that some walls do not have that familiar and cold grey stone surface. Instead, they are covered with warm, dark-coloured and carved wooden panels. That is wainscoting.
This is not just a decoration enriching the aesthetics of the room. It is also an architectural solution developed to break that ruthless cold of the stone. Stone is a soulless and ice-cold material that steals your heat when touched, whereas wood is inherently a softer, warmer and touchable surface. These oak or walnut plates mounted on the walls create a second barrier between the air inside the room and the stone wall. Just like the air gap behind the tapestries, a thin distance is left between the stone and wood. Behind these wooden coverings as well, this gap slows down the passage of moisture and cold to the wood. Thus, the surface facing inside the room always remains milder. While you can see this luxury in the chateaux or mansions of the period, in the houses of ordinary people there are bare stone or mud-plastered walls full of cracks where the wind whistles. This wooden covering in your room is a thermal privilege brought by status. When you run your hand over the wood surface, you don't feel that sudden shiver you feel when you touch stone. Wood keeps the room temperature within itself and reflects it back to you. Also that slight resin and old furniture smell emitted by wooden panels suppresses the damp smell emitted by stone, adding a warmer, more livable atmosphere to the room. This scent is a safe and deep-rooted scent, coming from the depths of the forest. In the silence of the night, the slight crackling sounds coming from the wooden panels with temperature changes are a sign that the room is alive. Unlike that frightening cracking of the stone, these sounds are softer and more familiar, as if the house itself is stretching and settling against the cold. Wooden coverings also soften the acoustics of the room. Preventing sounds from ringing on stone walls, it ensures a more muffled and peaceful silence. When torchlight hits the polished surface of the wood, the light is not absorbed. On the contrary, it returns to the room in a warm amber colour. Even this visual warmth is a factor that psychologically reduces your feeling of cold. You sleep inside this wooden box, somewhat insulated from that infinite cold of the stone, surrounded by nature's warmest material. Right under your bed, or on the small table at your bedside, your most loyal, but also coldest friend is waiting. A sharp dagger, or a sword, slightly drawn from its sheath. Being a king means never being fully safe, even if you are in the safest castle, behind the thickest walls. Assassins, traitors, or political enemies watch for that vulnerability brought by sleep. That is why a deadly piece of metal is always found within reach while falling asleep. However, on winter nights, this security measure turns into a physical discomfort. Because metal is the material that loses heat in the room fastest and holds the cold most intensely, when you take your hand out of that warm, soft and relaxing world of the bed and touch the hilt of that dagger to check, what you feel at your fingertips is almost a frozen piece of ice. That intense and sharp coldness of the metal burns your skin and pulls you from that foggy world of momentary sleep to that hard ground of reality. This contrast is like the difference between life and death. The inside of the bed is warm and alive. The weapon's metal is cold and lifeless. While peasants might feel safe with a rough piece of wood leaned against the back of their doors, your safety is entrusted to this finely crafted but freezing steel. As the room temperature drops throughout the night, metal weapons get even colder. If you put your dagger under your bed, every time you move your head or put your hand under the bed, you bump into that hard and cold mass. This contact whispers to you that you must be constantly on alert, that relaxation can be a weakness. The smell of metal, that iron and oil smell permeating your hand, mixes with the lavender smell in your bed. This is the smell of violence and power.
The existence of the weapon relaxes your mind. However, its touch chills your body.
Sometimes you hold the hilt in your palm to warm it, but the metal is so stubborn that it absorbs your heat and still remains cold. You dive into that restless sleep of kings with one eye open and one hand on cold metal, in the shadow of this ice-cold protector.
For the medieval person, sleep is not an uninterrupted 8-hour block as in our day. It is a 2-stage process, divided by night religious rituals and church bell sounds.
After the first sleep in the darkest and coldest hour of the night, you wake up with the bell sounds coming from the monastery or the castle chapel. This is the time for matins or midnight prayer. Stepping out of that safe cocoon of your warm bed into the ice-cold room is the greatest test of will. Your body makes a sudden transition from that tropical heat under the quilts to the freezing reality of the room, to that sub-zero air. This shock freezes your blood. It shakes your sleepy mind and takes your breath away. While a monk gets up at this hour, goes to the stone-floored church and prays shivering for hours, you as a king perform this ritual sometimes by sitting in your bed, sometimes in the special prayer corner in your bedroom at the Prix. However, in any case, sleep is interrupted. When you kneel to pray, you feel the cold coming from the ground despite the cushion under your knees. While clasping your hands and praying, you watch your fingers go numb from cold, and the prayers coming out of your mouth turn into white steam clouds. This is not only a spiritual duty, it is also a discipline that divides time in that long darkness of the night, separating the night into manageable parts. Going back to bed after the prayer ends is a separate adventure. The bed has cooled down a bit while you were away, but it is still much warmer than the rest of the room. Your body buries itself back into that warmth, shivering. This second sleep is usually the deeper, dreamier part that lasts until morning. Sleep historians call this biphasic, that is, two-phase sleep. This division changes the relationship you establish with the night and cold. The night is not just a void where one sleeps. It is a living time period where one wakes up, feels the cold, and takes shelter in warmth again. When the echoing of bell sounds on stone walls ends, the silence deepens even more, and you retreat to sleep, to that warm cave, with the peace of saving your soul, but the shiver of freezing your body. Contrary to the modern concept of privacy, in medieval winters, being alone in bed means freezing. One of the reasons why king's beds are so huge is that this space is designed not for a single person, but for a heat community. The Queen, sometimes small children, and even the most favourite assistants can share different corners of that wide bed. This is a purely biological survival strategy, rather than a romantic or emotional closeness. The human body is a living stove, radiating approximately 100 watts of heat. The more stoves under the quilt, the faster the air inside warms up and stays warm. The warmth of that other body you feel next to you when you lie down combines with your own warmth to form a common thermal pool. While among the common people it is mandatory for the whole family, mother, father, children and grandmothers, to sleep in a single bed hugging each other in a spoon position, everyone has their own space in the royal bed. But still, heat transfer is inevitable. The breath of the person next to you moisturizes and warms the air under the quilt. Sometimes, in the deepest part of sleep, you unconsciously approach the person next to you, because your body instinctively turns towards the heat source. This collective sleep is a barricade of flesh and blood, built against the freezing void of the room.
This crowd inside the bed also gives a sense of security. Hearing someone else's regular breathing suppresses the roar of the winter storm.
However, this situation has its difficulties too. Quilt struggles, someone else's cold feet touching you, or snoring sounds. Still, the presence of a warm mass next to you in that freezing hour of the morning is much better than waking up shivering alone. In that closed world under the quilt, ranks and titles are put aside. Only warm-blooded mammals trying to survive by warming each other remain. You survive the harshest night of winter, wrapped in the warmth of your family or spouse at the centre of this living heat network. When all those difficult hours of the night, the roar of the wind, prayers and dreams are left behind, the hardest and most dangerous moment of the day comes. Dawn. This hour, when the sun has not yet risen but the darkness begins to turn grey, is meteorologically the point where the air temperature is lowest. The fire in the fireplace is now completely out, leaving only cooled ashes and maybe faint smoke. The stone walls have consumed all that little heat they stored during the day, and are now reflecting the coldness of the frozen ground outside directly into the room. A thin layer of ice has formed on the water jug inside the room.
Your breath creates such dense steam in the room's air that you can almost not see in front of you. This is no longer a bedroom, but an ice cellar.
You hide in that last hot castle you still protect with your body heat, under quilts, furs and feathers. The tip of your nose, as the only part protruding out of the quilt, feels this freezing cold and aches.
Waking up is physical pain at this hour. The world outside the bed is so hostile, so cold, that even the idea of getting out of bed seems impossible.
You wait for the servants to come and revive the fire, to bring hot water to the room. But during that time seems frozen. The silence of the room has deepened even more with the weight of the cold. That pale blue and lifeless light leaking through the gaps of the window shutters pulls in a ghostly way on the items, chests and tapestries in the room.
Everything looks frozen, hard and motionless. The warmth inside the bed contrasts so greatly with this absolute paleness outside that lifting the quilt is like taking off protective armour and entering battle unarmed.
For people of the period, this moment is also known as the hour of death, because the elderly and the sick usually lose their lives at this coldest hour when body resistance is broken. You, on this dangerous threshold, shrink a bit more into the depths of your bed and wait for the sun to rise and warm the stones a little. Morning has come, but it has not warmed up yet. When you finally reach the ideal temperature, under that complex, layered and heavy architecture of the bed, the single and absolute rule valid for the rest of the night comes into play. Immobility. That restless sleep of modern man, turning in bed and looking for a comfortable position, is not a luxury but a downright mistake for a king in the medieval winter. That huge wool blankets, furs and quilts on you have created an airtight sealed heat capsule around your body. You are safe as long as you lie motionless, like a mummy inside this capsule. However, the slightest sudden movement you make, taking your arm out of the quilt or swinging your legs rapidly, creates a bellows effect and bursts that hot air pocket. The lifting of the edge of the quilt means that freezing cold outside fills inside as if vacuumed, and destroys that warm air you spent hours heating in seconds. Therefore, maintaining the sleep position turns into a learned discipline, a survival reflex rather than an unconscious action. Your body instinctively switches to the fetal position to preserve heat. Arms are crossed on the chest, legs are pulled to the belly. This is a universal geometry applied in the cold by all mammals in nature that minimizes heat loss by reducing surface area. When you are locked in this position, you sleep almost without moving until morning, with the help of the weight on you. This immobility allows your muscles to relax, and also allows you to save energy by slowing down your metabolism. Moving is saving energy, while immobility is storing energy and heat. Sometimes in the depths of sleep, when you extend your leg and touch a cold spot called the dead zone that hasn't warmed up yet, your body flinches as if it touched fire and immediately retreats to its old warm, safe area. The inside of the bed is an invisible map consisting of hot and cold zones, and you know you should never leave that narrow area you conquered with your own body heat, just as the knights of the period learned to lie in ambush without moving for hours on the battlefields. They lie in ambush against the cold in their beds with the same patience. This deep stillness changes the quality of sleep. Where there is no physical movement, the mind descends to deeper, dreamier layers. While the storm outside shakes the world, you are as silent and fixed as the stone statue under your quilts. In those darkest days of winter, in those long leaden time periods where the sun sets at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and does not rise until 8 the next morning, sleep becomes not only a rest but a way of life. In this world where there is no electricity, candlelight is expensive and limited, and there is no work to do outside. The night can last 14 to 16 hours. Even if you are a king, when the rule of darkness begins, the most logical thing you can do is to retreat to your bed and surrender to the rhythm of nature. This is a biological necessity resembling hibernation, very different from the 8-hour compressed sleep of modern man. Your body increases melatonin production with the decrease of light and drags you into a lethargy that forces you to spend most of the day in bed. These long sleep periods are actually an energy-saving mode. The amount of calories required to maintain body temperature in cold weather is enormous. Staying awake, moving, thinking and talking consumes energy. However, sleeping in that warm, furry nest is the best way to use limited food stocks and body fat sparingly by idling the metabolism. In those harsh centuries when the Little Ice Age was experienced, people saw winter as a dead time that had to be passed. You also go back and forth on that fine line between dreams and reality in a semi-awake, semi-sleepy state for hours in your bed. Time perception blurs. Where did the night start? When will it be morning? These questions become meaningless. There is only the warmth of the bed and the sound of the wind outside. These long nights are a unique opportunity for the body to repair itself and the mind to be purified from the stress of the day. However, lying down for such a long time can also lead to back pains and physical stiffness. Still, remaining in that safe prison of the bed is always more attractive than wandering inside the cold stone room. Kingdom affairs, war plans, troubles and worries can be postponed until the first warmth of spring falls. In this long winter night, you surrender yourself to the arms of that deep, dark and silent rest, offered to you by nature like bears and badgers. Even in moments when you are awake, you do not leave the warmth of the bed. You eat there, think there, live there. The bed becomes your throne, your shelter, and your world throughout the winter. Now the last candle inside the room has also flickered and gone out.
Now there is only a velvet darkness around you, and those hot wool and fur layers carrying the weight of centuries on you. The sound of the wind outside has turned into a distant lullaby.
The stone walls of the castle continue to stand guard like huge guardians protecting you from the cold. The hot stone under your feet, the soft pillows you lean your back against, and that smoky warm air filling your lungs all invite you to that deep and silent sleep of history. You are the sole ruler of this castle, this room, and this moment. The cold remained outside. Troubles were forgotten centuries away. There is only your breathing and the calm rhythm of your heart. Your eyelids are now too heavy to carry. Leave yourself to that soft void, to the sleep of kings. Good night.